Hello, and welcome to Coffee with Jesus. I am your host, Todd Ubeli. In this episode, I'm joined by Ms. Yilda Rivera. You all will recognize her. She writes our very outstanding descriptions for most of our episodes. And it's kind of become a tradition with us, Yilda, hasn't it? That you just come on and we collaborate in episode 10 for the season. So since this is episode 10, Ms. Yilda is with us again. And we've got a great episode for you. I know we've been talking about grief a lot in season 5 so far, and 2024 was a year of grief for a lot of people. Um, in this episode, we're going to kind of shift slightly, and we're going to talk more about being in the waiting, about waiting on God. We've got a great episode planned for us. Yilda, thank you again for joining us. It's always great to collaborate with you on these episodes and to have you on. So I guess we can just jump right in, and why don't we just start, Yilda, and you can just tell us about, what it means to you to just be in the waiting.
Yes, so when you invited me for this episode number 10, man, I was struggling to figure out what to share or which topic to talk about. I was maybe trying to avoid talking about meat altogether because nothing exciting is happening, just because I'm in this season of waiting. And there's nothing glamorous or exciting about being in the waiting. And it was not until the beginning of this month of January that the Lord gave me the confirmation to talk about actually being in the waiting, that there's nothing to be ashamed of about being in the waiting season, walking in the waiting season. And I said walking in the waiting season because many times we associate being in the waiting with being stagnant and that nothing is happening. And honestly, I say this because that lie had sometimes infiltrated in my mind and brought frustration. So first, let's talk about what it means to be in the waiting. I don't know, what does it mean to you?
Well, I think I definitely have to agree that when I'm waiting and when I'm in the waiting, it does kind of feel like I'm doing nothing, and I feel like I need to be doing something. But sometimes we do have to just wait on God. A lot of times when He does call us to do something, we think, oh, right now, this very second, I'm gonna jump to it. And God's like, no, 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 slow down. It's okay. I've got to prepare you first. So being in the waiting doesn't necessarily mean being inactive. It just means that God is kind of preparing us for what he's called us to do, I think.
Yeah, and I will add too that sometimes, how the waiting looks like, it might look like a prolonged hardship, a difficult situation that you have been enduring for quite a while, an unanswered prayer, an unrealized goal, a delayed harvest after all the energy, you put in. And it's not sometimes comfortable. So we, like you said, we want to get onto action. We want to do things. And sometimes, it's not the moment or something is going to be, happening soon.
No, absolutely, absolutely. It's especially that delay part. God works on His timing, not necessarily on our timing.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
so that unrealized goal, that delayed harvest, as you put it, is yeah, it's definitely part of being in the waiting.
Yep. Yep. And just what you said, to be definitely the waiting resonates with those times when it seems that God is delaying, when it seems silent. And particularly in my case, I said that I'm in a waiting season as I find myself dealing now with a chronic neurological condition that, although it got better for a while, in the last few months, it's been difficult to manage and has been impacting my day-to-day life. And I'm not going to overwhelm you with details, but in a nutshell, I developed this severe case of light sensitivity that even doing my day job, which is writing and editing in front of a screen, it's hard. Bright environments wear me down slowly and painfully, and certainly certain visual effects and noise trigger my brain in a bad way. And when my brain is triggered in a bad way, my face, starts getting stiff. I cannot even smile. I cannot speak clearly. My left side doesn't work doesn't function well. And at times, this is very debilitating. I just need to crash. And all these started almost 2 years ago as a result of a stroke and a severe anaphylactic reaction to a medication that affected my brain, allergic reaction, basically. Through that experience, when this happened, God revealed to me that there is a purpose in all this. Sometimes I struggle to try to figure it out. And during this waiting, I realized that it is not up to me to figure out God's purpose or the why. That's not the end goal. His ways are greater than my ways, his thoughts greater than my thoughts. So I realized that in this journey, in this waiting, I need to take delight in his presence, trust his timing, like you mentioned, and let him guide me along the way as he shows me glimpses of his glory. I learned that God uses the waiting to build us up, to know him more in a greater scale, to reveal himself to us in a new way. And this process shapes our faith. So, in this episode, I want to share with you 3 actions to encourage you when you find yourself in the waiting. And the first one is, in the waiting, seek God's peace. And we find God's peace in his presence. When talking about this, all I can think at first is Psalm 23, just because we can have a glimpse of this exchange, his presence, peace working. Let's take a look, just a brief look at the beginning. It starts with the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Other versions say, I lack nothing. As we go to our shepherd, our God, to seek his presence, we have this feeling that feels everything in every way. And sometimes I find myself praying like this. Thank you, Lord, for your spirit. For your spirit is within me. And in your spirit, I have everything I need. And I keep repeating this like as a mantra, just to feel myself, immerse myself in his presence. Because sometimes, I will say many times, the feeling of his presence is not tangible, like I can feel it, it's nothing like that. It's like with the knowledge that he's there, I feel then, I know first that he's there because he's not a liar. He told me that he's going to be there regardless whether I feel it or not. And that's why sometimes I need to start like that. And then the song continues. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. So here we can see God's peace at work, and all because of his presence. And as we continue reading the song, we know how fear subsides and how his presence continues to comfort us. And in particular, I want to bring attention to the last verse, which is verse 6, when it says, you prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Even if surrounded by foes or chaos, even if this chronic condition in my case keeps reminding me of uncertainty and barriers and walking in circles, God prepares a table for me and invites me to sit at the table with him. Something to note about this image, this table image, when we prepare a table for those we love, means that excitement to acknowledge them, to treat them with food, hang out, speak about things, have a meaningful time together. And in this case, it is God who prepares the table and invites us in. It just showed me how he loves us, how he cares, and this table is relational. Our perspective changes when we understand that God cares and cares about us.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Well, so I would just going back real quick, because when you talk about how he protects us from our enemies and from chaos. And I remember when my father passed away and I was going over for the funeral. And my brother calls me and he's like, yeah, our sister wants to have words with you at the funeral. And I was like, what do you mean? I mean, my sister wanted to have this confrontation with me at the funeral because of some perceived something. I don't even really know the history. My sister and I don't talk very much, so I'm not even sure what she was angry about. And so I just brought that up before God because the funeral is not the place for that kind of thing. And I also didn't trust myself, being having born and raised in New York, not to respond in kind. And so I just brought the whole situation up before God, and He took care of all of it. There was no confrontation, there was no conversation. It was just, "Hey, thank you for coming," and that was it. And then the funeral was over, and I went on my way, and that was it. I haven't even talked to her since then. So sometimes we see these things that could happen, these like this confrontation that my sister wanted to have, and God will protect us from that, and He will bless us in front of them. He does, in a sense, in a very real sense, like you said, that table it's very nurturing, it's very relational. And in a sense, when we prepare that table for our families, we're taking care of them. And God does that for us. And in this case, at my father's funeral, he very much did that for me as well.
Yeah, I mean that Psalm 23, it's an invitation just to seek his peace and take delight with his refreshment, because it means everything. And talking about, coming to his presence, finding his peace, all I can say that for me, finding his presence, um, it's sometimes holding on to his promises and repeating them to me, um, trying to find those little glimpses of his glory that he's trying to show me. I use a lot worship music to kind to immerse myself in his presence and repeat truth and use truth to battle, whatever feelings I might be dealing with it at the moment. So the second action to encourage you when you find yourself in the waiting, trust God's timing, because his timings bring greater glory. And I'm going to explain this one through a personal story. One day, this person that I hadn't seen me in a while asked me how I was doing. She wanted me to know that she had been praying for me and had others praying for me too. I told her I was doing well and thanked her for all of the prayers. But immediately I knew that she wanted me to be more specific. So after giving her a more detailed update about my situation, she seemed puzzled and said, "I don't understand. After all the prayers we have been doing for you, you should have been healed by now. I wonder what's wrong, and ouch." At that moment, that sounded really hurtful. But I knew that she didn't mean it in a bad way. I realized that sometimes we ask the same thing when we find ourselves in the waiting, what's wrong with me? um, so I took a deep breath and smiled and told her that there was nothing wrong in God's timing. I reassured her that God is good and that his timing is perfect. I told her that I was thankful because in this healing process, I was feeling God's embrace and seeing glimpses of his glory and him lifting me up. And I shared with her the part when Jesus comes across a blind man, this part in the book of John, chapter 9, when it reads something like this. And he, Jesus, right, passed by and saw a man blind from birth. And the disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Basically, the disciples are asking me, "Hey, what's wrong with him?" And Jesus answered, "It was not this man that sinned or his parents, but that the works of God might be displayed in him." So we don't have to see the waiting as if nothing is happening or that something is wrong. In the waiting, God is at work. My advice will be continue to pray and wait expectantly. God provides, even though his provision or answer may not be within the outcomes that we might expect.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And last year, there was just a lot of things happening at the same time. We were looking at a potential move, and my father passed away. My youngest was graduating from college. My middle kid totaled my car, and then of course, in the midst of all this, my cat ran away.
Oh, no.
And so at least, for this podcast, for Coffee with Jesus, I was kind of sharing some of this real time. A lot of times what we'll do is we'll share how God has helped us in the past, how he got us through our tribulations in the past. And what I was doing for a couple of episodes was I was kind of sharing real time, what I was going through, right or wrong, good or bad. This is what I'm going through. This is how I'm reacting. And this is how God's helping me. And God didn't provide the answers and the help when I wanted it to. He did it all in his timing. And he did get me through it all. And I know when you're going through the storm, it's very difficult to see the sunlight on the other side.
Yep.
And that sunlight won't always come when we want it to. And one person, one of the feedback was, well, that's great and all, but when are you going to get back to what you normally do? When are you going to be done suffering and talk about it in the past, basically? And so kind of similar to that reaction that your friend had, and it kind of stung a little bit, because I'd wanted to show people, look, even when you're in the midst of suffering, God is with you. And I do know there was some people who did appreciate that, but that one piece of feedback also was like, okay, well, let's move on. Let's go back to what Coffee with Jesus used to be, and it's like, okay, I appreciate the feedback, but it did sting a little bit because I was kind of making myself a little bit vulnerable by sharing my own tribulations as they were happening. Sometimes people from the outside, they do want to be helpful, but they say things that can hurt us inadvertently. But also, even though things don't happen as we want them, and even though things happen in God's timing, God's still going to help us. He's still helping us and giving us the strength to get through things. He will do it on his timing.
Yeah. Yeah. And we have the hope also that not only he knows, his timing is perfect, but it's for a greater glory, a greater testimony, if you want to say that way, to see it that way. So this idea of expectation and outcome brings me to the third thing I learned about being in the waiting, which is in the waiting, trust God with the outcome. We can see this point in the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Did I say it right?
As far as I know, I'm not an expert, but yeah, I think you said it just right.
So this story to me is powerful, not because of their bold faith and the miracle that happened, but by something they said right before the miracle happened. And just to recap on the story, right? Let me go really brief, for those who don't know the story. In the story, we have these three men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that were exiled from Israel by the Babylonians, right? And at some point, the king at the time builds a golden statue and orders everyone to bow down and worship the statue. But these three men refuse because they will only bow to worship their true God. And so they're taken prisoners and condemned to death. And the death penalty was to be thrown into a burning fiery furnace to be burned alive. When we read this story, we know what happened. The men were unharmed by the fire, and when the king looked into the fire, he saw four men, not three, walking around in the fire unharmed. And the fourth man, it says that was described as looking as the Son of God. But here's the thing. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they didn't know at the time the outcome of the story, right? Here's that valuable piece of information that I get from this story that tells me about trusting God with the outcome. In the story, it's in Daniel chapter 3. And here, they were even offered another opportunity to bow down before the king to that idol, and still, they refuse. So they say, here the three men reply to the king, "O king, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand." And here's the part that just, strikes me. But even if he does not, we want you to know, Your Majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. So that part, when they say, even if he does not, doesn't mean that there is doubt in their faith. On the contrary, that statement, even if he does not, even if God doesn't show up, teaches me about this third action or posture about waiting, which is in the waiting, in the praying, because they go together. God reaffirms us his promises. And in the process, we must trust God with the outcome.
Oh, absolutely. I find myself sometimes struggling because it's knowing that God can do something. And it's like, sometimes I feel like it's a lack of faith if I think, okay, well, God won't do this, but there's some things God won't do. Like if I ask God to help me win the lottery, he's going to say no. I mean, he could say yes. He could choose to bless me in that regard, and I would love it. God, give me the chance to show you what I'll do with this money. But that doesn't mean he's not able to, right? Whenever we do go before God, there's a guy can tell us, yes, I'll help you. He can say, no, I'm not going to do this, or he can say, well, just wait a little bit. Like we're talking about now, being in the waiting. Like those three men, and you're braver than I am. I'm not going to try to pronounce their names. We're saying, if even if he does not, it's not even if he can't. It's even if God chooses not to, right? He has the power and authority. He created the entire universe. He can help us. Sometimes he chooses not to, and it's a long while back. I did an episode about rain or rockets, right? God help us in the big things. He protected me, literally protected me from gunfire and rockets in Afghanistan. He protects us from small things, and I talked about how he quite literally protected me from the rain, just walking that mile to my car from my office. Someone asked me one time, "Well, have you ever gotten wet walking to your car?" And the answer is yes. And I think that's a great illustration because sometimes God does protect us from those storms, right? Whether it's literal rainfall into the ground or just the storms of life. And sometimes he doesn't. You know, when I had COVID, I was in a lot of pain, especially towards the end. It was like just right before it was over. It was just double earache, sore throat. I couldn't even sleep. I was hurting so much. And for days I was crying out to God, God, please make this pain go away. And at first he didn't. Now eventually, yes, I made it through COVID and I was healed. But God didn't end that pain when I wanted him to. You know, it doesn't mean he was not able to, right? But it meant that he was going to heal me in his timing. And, you know, I was able to use that for a testimony later on. So yeah, sometimes God will wait to help us, and sometimes he will make us go through certain storms. And that doesn't mean he can't. It doesn't mean he's not able to, right? He does have that power.
Yeah.
And it's just like we talked in the very beginning about God's timing isn't always our timing.
Yeah. There's sometimes how I love worship, and through this all ordeal, that I'm going through, and I have to say that I'm so thankful, because God is allowing me, I can still play my bass guitar. For a while I couldn't, but now I'm able to do it despite, sometimes I have to push through. But as soon as I start worshiping and playing it, it's just joy, because I know that I'm able to do this because He's there. Maybe it's not on the way I would desire or think, but I know, the glory is His. Because all I know is that I'm able to do these things just because of His grace. Let's not get frustrated in the waiting and miss what God is doing. When in the waiting, pray, Lord, what are you teaching me this season? Or what do you want me to see? And wait expectantly.
Oh man, and I can't even imagine, what you've been going through. I have definitely been praying for you and will continue to do so. And I know that God is with you, and I very much appreciate you sharing your testimony here. And I appreciate your strength coming through it all. Like I said, I can't even imagine what you've been going through, but I am inspired by your strength. And I'm so thankful that you're willing to talk about it to help other people as well. So I mean, thank you doesn't even seem to cut it, but thank you. Thank you for the strength that you've shown, and thank you for your willingness to share so that we can help others, because ultimately that's what we're trying to do here. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you for you to trust me to shut up, to be here and
Oh,
share.
of course, anytime, anytime. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for watching. Thank you for listening. And our prayer is that God will bless each and every one of you.